start that. Okay, cool. Well, welcome. I'm super happy to have you all here for how to drive impactful office hours. We have Vyju here, and I'm going to introduce her in a second, but I'll give you a quick background on Odyssey. I know most of you are Odyssey professionals, but just in case, basically, I was a first-generation college student trying to break into finance, and it was just a really overwhelming process. And finally, through the 10 degrees of separation, somebody became a mentor and really had a huge impact on my career trajectory. So Odyssey is about helping facilitate those connections because professionals are out there and want to help. So you can log in, post 30-minute slots of office hours, and we connect you with underrepresented students who just want to need a helping hand in their career journey. It's free to join, so we'd love to have you there if you're not on board. Also during the session, please feel free to drop questions in the chat, raise your hand, or just speak out if you have any questions. And we had a couple submitted beforehand, so we'll definitely get to those. But without further ado, we have Vyju, who I'm wearing the Columbia sweater. I don't know if you noticed, Vyju, but I met Vyju at Columbia Business School, and she was really helpful during my time there. And I'm really excited to have her here today. So do you want to get started with just a quick intro?
Thank you, Brian. And I'm truly delighted to be here. You know, it's wonderful to see your students succeed, you know, and as a career advisor, and, you know, it gives us no greater joy than to see someone whom you worked with, young, lot of energy, really go the extra mile, right, and do well. And I'm so pleased that all of you are volunteering your time to work with students who might otherwise not get a leg up into the tech. This is tech space, right? If I'm not
tech consulting and finance. Yeah, we brought into all the major industries.
Oh, fantastic for tech consulting and finance. How awesome is that? So as Brian said, you know, our paths crossed at Columbia Business School, where I still work as a career advisor. I primarily focus on the international students. 40% of our student population in the business school is from overseas. So we have a large cohort of students, about 300 a year who graduate, who are from overseas. In addition, I also work with our specialized master's population. The business school has 3 small master's cohorts that primarily focus on finance. So Brian, I'm sure they would welcome any mentoring that you can provide in that space. And
we'll have to look into that.
Yes, definitely. I'm happy to connect you with them. Mine was an accidental foray into advising. You know, I trained as a statistician, then I moved into electrical engineering, you know, was working at Bell Labs. For those of you who might have heard of Bell Labs, it's from a prior generation, right? Was looking forward to a career there. Then my spouse, who's actually faculty at Columbia in engineering, got a position in the Midwest he couldn't say no to. So from the concrete jungles of Manhattan, we moved to the cornfields in Indiana. And, you know, it was a huge change for me. And when I was there, I was recruited to be an advisor to engineers at Purdue, electrical engineers, freshman engineers at Purdue. And I truly felt that that was my calling. You know, I loved working with, you know, 18-year-olds from not just Indiana, from all over the world. I set up an international advising group there just to help students, you know, acclimatize themselves. And I found that, you know, this gave me a lot of satisfaction. And I felt I had a purpose. So since then, you know, I haven't looked back. I taught math at a community college for about 10 years, but I continued to advise students. And then we made a U-turn and came back to Columbia about 10 years ago. And I was recruited by the advising office here where I work with undergraduates. Then the Career Center at Columbia recruited me to work with their masters and PhDs. And then I moved on to the business school. So for about 2 to 3 decades now, I've been in student services and simply loved it, right? I enjoy the educational aspect of it, where I created, curriculum around advising. Because as you can know, you know, all of you have volunteered to be mentors. We're not giving a person a fish, we're teaching them how to fish so that they can help themselves for the rest of their lives, right? So today, you know, Brian and I were talking about, you know, appropriate curriculum for mentors. And he said, you know, how about, you know, we do something on how to be an effective mentor or how to make the most of an advising session. So I've put together a small PowerPoint to guide the conversation. So I'm going to start sharing now, but feel free to interrupt anytime. If you have any questions, would love to hear, you know, what you have, any questions that you might have. Let's see. Um, Earlier this year or late last year, I launched a small company called the Career Success Academy, where with the statement that, fortune favors the prepared. So like I said, since we are in the education space, I truly believe that, people can make their own luck happen when they are prepared, because you become open to opportunities. So, let's get started. I was kind of pleasantly surprised when I tried to figure out where the word mentor came from. And I realized that it leads back to Homer's Odyssey. And, this is interesting, right? We're sitting at Odyssey here. And the word mentor is related to Odyssey. It's the name of the person who helped watch over Odysseus' son, Telemachus. And the meaning apparently is a wise advisor, an intimate friend, and the sage counselor. And, I'm really pleased and proud to be associated with these words, right? An advisor, an intimate friend, and the sage counselor. I really like the way it sounds. So moving on. So like I said, I've been in the advising space for quite a while. And, this is kind of strange, but every time I meet a new student, right, I'm actually worried. And what are some of my worries, right? First thing is, will I connect with my advisee? Will I connect with my mentee? It's very important. I've set aside the next 30, 45 minutes to have a fruitful conversation with this person. Will I connect with them? Am I going to be a good match? What if they ask me a question that I cannot answer? We're all afraid of embarrassment, right? So this is something that really worries me. And then halfway through the conversation, sometimes you begin to notice the body language and they look like they've checked out or they've zoned out or they're disinterested. They don't want to hear what you want to say. Right? So how do you make sure that the mentee actually rates the conversation as being helpful, right? You have spent 30, 45 minutes. The mentee has walked into your room hoping to get some clarity. And when they leave the room, are they going to leave as a satisfied customer? I know that it's, we're not thinking of them as a classic customer, but still, right? You have invested time, they have invested time. Is it fruitful? How do we ensure that it actually works for both of you? Of course, this is predicated on the fact that the mentee comes to your session prepared. But quite often when you're working with, really young people or people who are trying to explore a field, they may not be as prepared. How do we ensure that we have a great conversation, right? So here are, I thought of 4 things, by the way. Well, first of all, because you have decided to be a mentor, this now gives you the ability to take ownership of your students' success. What does it mean? Since you want to be a mentor, you know that you want to make a difference in somebody's life, right? Which means that you have an obligation now to kind of clear a path for the person so that they can see forward and also help, course correct as needed. And actually you have the power to intervene, to refer and advocate for them. And especially as Brian said, if these are first generation students, and I have worked with a lot of them, especially in my years in a community college, but really they don't have anybody to talk to ask for information. So any information that you give them is precious, right? And
no pressure.
I'm sorry?
No pressure at all.
No pressure, right. The next thing is, to read between the lines. And what does that mean? One of the things is to really listen, right? And I don't know about the audience here, but I'm a parent, I have 2 children, and quite often they say, don't rush to a solution. When I come to you sometimes to ask you something, just listen, right? Don't interrupt. So that's critical, to really let them speak uninterrupted. And sometimes they may not even know what they want and what it is, that they want to ask for, right? So it's up to us as the adults in the room to help facilitate this conversation by listening and by probing. And one thing that really helps is to talk about your own path. How you struggled perhaps. What were some lucky breaks that you got? How did you decide to do what you do? And why do you do what you do? Right? Once you're open about your own background, students really relate to this and they see you more as a human and somebody who's relatable.
You mentioned all those questions you have beforehand where you could be nervous about the office hour, and I think the students come in and they're nervous, and for them to realize that you also have these concerns, I think it's definitely kind of sets a level playing ground, and it makes everybody a lot more comfortable.
True. And then the third thing is, we're not experts in everything, right? And to acknowledge that, not only to ourselves, to the student as well. So if they ever ask you a question and you're stumped, or you realize you've reached your own limit, is to know to start referring them to somebody else or somewhere else, so you can leverage your own network on behalf of your student as well. And then if you do refer them to somebody else, you may want to set a follow-up appointment, right? And to kind of close the loop and make sure that they do follow up and ask them how the conversation went. And then you can also then determine whether additional steps are necessary, right? So the critical thing here is also to acknowledge your own limits, where you can and cannot help. And then, when a student walks into a room, it's like how we feel when we walk into a doctor's office. Sometimes you feel the doctor has one foot in the office and the other foot outside the door, and you feel like, hey, I'm here. I'm here to talk to you about my troubles, and you don't seem to listen at all, right? So it's for you to commit to the time to sit down and make the conversation as relaxed as possible. Ask them questions, and we'll actually go through a few questions that you can ask them. How are they doing outside the classroom? And if you're not able to complete the conversation in the 30 or 45 minutes, time slot that you've set aside for them, is to say, let's follow up, come back. And this will give you an opportunity also to build that relationship. And the last thing is, if you haven't seen a mentee in a while, even just a 1-line or 2-line email that says, hey, I haven't seen you, how are you doing, really can make their day. And I can attest to this, by the way, because when I just send a simple email to a student saying, we met last week, you said you had an interview coming up, how did the interview go? 9 times out of 10, I get this super excited email, even if they haven't done well. And it usually starts out by saying, thank you so much for checking in, right? So people really, really are pleased when they get a follow-up from someone who's actually, older or, higher in stature than them, right? That somebody thought of them enough to follow up. I'm just going to stop sharing.
And if you're on Odyssey and you do an office hour, in that post-office hour follow-up survey, if you both say that you want to stay connected, then we'll send that connection email in about 2 weeks later. And that's a good opportunity for you to check in. It's been a couple of weeks. Maybe if they had action items or referrals, you can say, hey, did you connect with so-and-so, or did you do what I recommended? And it can be definitely a really powerful follow-up tool.
So one of the things I realized, Brian, is when I used to teach at the community college, a lot of students were first generation, right? And it was kind of sad when one student told me, he said, I go home and there is nobody to ask me, how was your day? What did you learn in school, right? So this kind of special touches where you simply ask, how is it going? I referred you to so-and-so, or I had you read this article, or I wanted you to do this work. Just doing that thoughtful, follow-up really means so much to these students.
Definitely.
Right? Any questions so far? Okay, so let's continue.
Oh, we did have a question come in. So Marcella put in the chat, do you have tips on how to make them feel like they can reach out to us, even if there's no specific reason to follow up ourselves? I think that's a great question, because a lot of times it can be intimidating. You already donated your time. Maybe the student feels like they don't have the right to take any of your time away. So is there any methods or tips you might have?
One thing is, during the course of the conversation is to tell them, look, I'm open to you. We can set some time aside. If you take, if you send me a follow-up email, I do have time for follow-up conversations. Is it what you wanted to know? Yes. So one of the things, Brian, I don't know if Odyssey encourages this, is for all students when they have an appointment to send a thank you note.
So we don't currently encourage that, or we don't have that in the guidelines, but I think that would definitely be something important that we should add to the primer.
Yes. So every student, anytime they have with a mentor, whether they felt it was helpful or not, that's besides the issue, is learned how to say thank you. Right. And I tell you, at Columbia, at the business school, when we don't get a thank you note, we remember. I went out of my way to not for just a regular advising session, but when I go out of my way, when I connect a student with somebody else and I don't get that, thank you for doing this, and they don't close the loop, I'm thinking, you should do better than this.
I'm checking my outbox right now.
That's important. So I think training students to say thank you, and then that gives them an opportunity to say, to perhaps reflect on one or two things that happened during the conversation, and then ask for a follow-up. That's how you keep this virtuous cycle going, right? And then when I get a thank you note from a student, which is completely unexpected, it makes me want to give back more to the student. Right? You just get that little rush of dopamine in your head that says, oh, this feels good, right? So these are all great traits, by the way. I think it was Woody Allen who said 80% of success is showing up. And I say, a good part of the success is also saying thanks and keeping relationships warm is critical. And I think somebody else had posted something about.
Yep, another question came in from Muff, and it's students tend to ask me about open job opportunities. How do you differentiate yourself as a mentor rather than a recruiter for them? And I think that this question is definitely relevant for maybe the first time you're connecting, and rather than having had built a relationship where it's appropriate to start asking for that.
Yeah, I think students have to know that you're here to talk about your career path, to give them industry knowledge and to talk about the company and your job duties, and anything else that you wish to talk about. And I think, Brian, I'm sure you set expectations, right, for students to say, look, one thing that you cannot do with a mentor is to ask for job opportunities. However, that said, students should also be encouraged to ask in general about opportunities. What kind of, job sites did you go to when you were looking for positions? And as a mentor, I think it would also be helpful for all of you to have those answers ready. So if a student is already in college, to say, I wonder what the jobs board in your college looks like. And to ask them, how do you leverage LinkedIn to find opportunities? Have you looked at Indeed.com, which is a job site, right? And I think Odyssey and I are planning to offer a workshop called the 2-Hour Job Search. I don't know if you've heard of that resource. It's by a career coach from Duke at the business school at Fuqua. Steve Dalton has come up with this very interesting way of job hunting. I mean, it says 2-hour job search. I mean, it doesn't take 2 hours to land a job. We all know that. It takes 2 hours actually to come up with a plan to launch your job search. But it is an amazing way to conduct your job search with good, it provides very good guardrails. So you're not just randomly applying to positions, right? You kind of have a curated list, and you also learn how to talk to people, right? So we'll be offering that in about two weeks.
So I just put the registration link in the chat, and it's March 17th. So if you're interested, definitely.
By the way, this is helpful for mentors as well. I think people are saying that we will hold anywhere from 7 to 14 jobs by the time we retire, if we retire at all. So the 2-hour job search methodology is also helpful if you're looking to pivot. It's really, really wonderful if anybody would like to attend. All right. Okay. To continue. Oh, just lost this. Sorry, I have to, some reason. Let's go. All right. All right. So let us say you have 30 minutes. Our appointment's 30 minutes long.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would a structure look like, right? So I would say the first 5 minutes, ask some questions, how's it going? What did you do over the weekend? Anything interesting happen? Again, it is to let them speak uninterrupted. And by the way, I have started doing this myself. When I meet a student for the first time, I tell them, something like, okay, it's 12:01. I'm just going to let you speak uninterrupted for 5 minutes. And I don't say a word. I just take notes, right? And Brian, I don't know if you encourage the students to take a piece of paper and pencil to meetings to start taking notes.
Currently we don't, but we're working on like building basically a planner that they can use during the meeting. So hopefully that'll be launched in the next month.
So you can let them speak uninterrupted for 3 minutes, do time yourself. And then you speak for about 2 minutes about yourself, the relevant parts of your life, about your career and your life path. So that would take about the first 5 minutes, let's say. The next 5 minutes, I would ask them background information if this is the first time you're meeting them. And these are largely likes and dislikes. And by the way, we're putting together a small form, with all these questions in them, so you don't have to take notes. We'll send it to you. Brian will forward it to you later. Ask them about their hobbies. And I like this third question, which is, which parts of your life do you dislike? Do you expect this to change soon? I think it'll give you a lot of insight into what they're struggling with currently. And hopefully, they don't reveal too much. This is not intended to burden you, but you can ask them, what parts of your academic or professional life do you dislike? So, it doesn't become personal. And then important people in their life. So you learn, a little bit about their network and things that, about their current or past jobs you like and dislike. Why do we ask these questions? And, I would encourage you to take notes as well, so that when you start sharing about your career path, right, you now have something to go off on. All right. So that would take about the first, 10 to 15 minutes. You do need to keep, one eye on the clock constantly. And then you can, if they don't launch asking you questions because, they may be shy or they may not even know what to ask you, you can ask them, so why are we meeting today? Why are you meeting with me today? What is it that you want to know about me? Are you interested in learning more about the industry, consulting as a whole? Are you interested in knowing about the position that I have, right? I'm a strategy consultant, or I work in HR and technology, or, I'm a banker. I help companies, launch their IPOs, whatever it be. What is it that you want to know? And if honestly they say, I don't know, then I would be prepared to give them an industry overview, a little bit about your company and about what you do on a day-to-day basis. And now, since you know about their likes and dislikes, you can tailor the answer that you give them based on what they told you. And then finally, you can ask them, right? Are you looking for specific resources? Do you want to speak with more people? What is it you want from this conversation?
I think a lot of this is driven by, we have freshmen all the way through seniors, and by the time they're seniors, a lot of them have gotten the reps in. They've done a lot of coffee chats and interviews, but a lot of the freshmen are just, they're really nervous. They haven't had these conversations before. And I think these questions are going to be really helpful to kind of break the ice. And they're not there to waste your time if they don't know what to ask. They're just nervous and don't know exactly how to ask and learn and start kind of exploring.
Thank you. Yeah. And then always leave some time aside at the end for a wrap up. Even if you're not able to get through everything, set the last 5 minutes to wrap up so that they feel that there is closure. Conversations end very abruptly. You look at your watch and go, whoop, gotta go to a meeting, and then it ends abruptly, right? So set some time aside at the end and ask them, have I answered most of your questions today? And typically they say yes, or sometimes they might say, well, most of it, maybe can we have another conversation, right? And then this is critical. Give them a minute to summarize what they've heard. If you've given them homework, they can tell you in their own words what they've heard. So this echoing is important. And then if you are referring someone to them or asking them to do some reading, it would be very helpful to schedule a follow-up. This means that you also have to take notes, right? You can put it on your calendar, say, let's meet in 2 weeks. And quickly, you just want to, say, put a few things in your calendar so that when they come back to you, you can just take off from where you left off the previous time. Now, what are some common mistakes? And I tell you, I'm guilty of all of these. Sometimes, we get on our favorite perch and then we start talking. About things that we're proud of, or we think they have to know, or we may get into the weeds too soon. You may all recall asking your parent, when you were 10 or 12 years old about something, in physics or math or something in history, and your parent goes, "Okay, let me tell you, in 1758," right? And then they start, and we go, "No, just tell me. I just want to do this homework. It's supposed to take me 3 minutes," right? So we have to be mindful of that. And you don't have to provide solutions to all of their problems. That's when it becomes really difficult. If you feel obligated, right? We don't have to do that. The third thing is difficult. You're giving them the best advice you think you have. 8 times out of 10, they're not going to do it. Right? But every once in a while, there'll be someone who follows up, and it'll be well worth it. And lastly, to speak in absolutes. Sentences like "you should" or "you must." It seems so imperative that they do those things, right? And students cringe when they hear that. Or everyone thinks. We don't know that. And, when we start using the words like "no offense," they know that an offense is coming up. It's following. And statements like "you're always," or "if you want to succeed," right? There are many paths to success. Here, students, and it's easy to fall into this. And like I said, as a parent, I'm so guilty of doing this with my children. So I've become extra mindful once they became adults and said, "You know what, we don't like you using those words on us." So just to be careful. Now, let's say you're meeting the student for the second time. You've had a great first conversation. The student comes back. What can you now do? Start out with pleasantries. Again, let them speak uninterrupted for 2 to 3 minutes. What have they been up to since the last meeting? Have they followed up on things that you've recommended? And if they say no, no judgment. And say, "Yeah, I understand. Sometimes it's not easy to get everything, but moving on." And immediately you want to ask them, what's the top thing on your mind today? And what else is in your mind? Because sometimes they may have a couple of questions and they may only say the top thing on their mind. And when they say something else is on their mind, you might find that may be easier to tackle first. Use silence, right? After you give them, you tell them, give them your opinion, you may want to wait for it to get absorbed. And I also I remind students to take notes sometimes. Even with my MBA students, I remind them, I say, would you want to write that down? Because putting pen to paper is so important. Right? And again, give yourself the 5-minute deadline and say, "Okay, we're going to wrap up. Let's review what we've spoken today. Can you help me understand, what are the main points of today's conversation?"
Right? I think the silence thing is a great point, because it naturally, you just want to fill those gaps and start talking, but it can be really helpful for the student for them to have a little bit of time to absorb that.
So what I did was, I took a few key points from today's presentation. I put them on a piece of paper because I do have an intake form for myself, which I use so that I'm consistent with my students. I make sure that I ask them the same questions every single time. And then it also reminds me that I have to let the students speak uninterrupted and so on. So we put together something very simple, just on a Word document with some of those questions. I think Brian will share it with you. If you want to keep it, when I was in an office, I would print it out and I would take notes. But then you may be able to just do it online or just use it as a reminder if that would help you. that was a presentation, but I'm open to questions. If there are any questions that you want to ask me, happy to answer.
And that document, just so everybody knows, it was in the reminder email, but it'll also be in the follow-up when we share a post-event survey. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can just interject.
What has been the highlight for all of you in mentoring? Abdul Kamal, I'm going to ask you.
I think, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I think for me, it's been sort of like the repeated conversations and being able to see how the mentee or mentees have sort of advanced from the first conversation. I'm only fairly recently joined Odyssey, but in other walks of life where I do have mentees, I think what you're saying is completely valid, where the first conversation can be a little awkward, and I've definitely contributed to that awkwardness. But as the relationship grows, it's great to watch that student, fresh hire, et cetera, grow as well. Almost makes me feel like a parent, even though I'm not one yet.
That's awesome.
How about you, Lital, is it?
Hi, yes, Lital. I would say the best part is seeing the consistent growth from one meeting to the next, and seeing that you're connecting with someone and that making a difference.
Anybody else have any surprise in conversations? Frank, anything that surprised you, for instance? Not necessarily in the positive way, but in any way.
There you go. Not so much. I haven't really been doing the mentoring with Odyssey yet. So I'm just kind of learning about it. I do a little bit of that in my course in teaching, where there's sort of this body of academic work that people like to leave school with, and yet, no matter what the subject matter, when they get into applying it to a career, it's like there's something missing, typically, which I think is why a mentor is sort of the perfect answer to bringing somebody from the education alone into the real world, in a sense.
That is the missing piece.
The gap between the classroom education and what it means to work, I think there's a huge chasm. And also why a student chooses a particular major in college, sometimes it's a mystery to me. You ask them why they studied what they studied, and sometimes it's hard. They themselves don't know. They kind of fell into it by accident, and then now they're just going along for the ride. So intentionality, thoughtfulness. I mean, there is no time for a lot of these students, or the resources to help them make these right decisions. It's hard. You're right, Frank. Yeah, there is a huge chasm, and that's what the career centers try to do, is provide the bridge between what is taught in the classroom or the skills they've learned to what they'll be doing at work, right? That's the whole goal. And now somebody had posted a question saying, well, how would you guide a student who walks into your room and says, I don't know what I want to do? That is a tough one. And really, and I'm also very careful because they're a blank slate, and some of them can be easily coerced into, adopting a major or something that they may not be ready for or quite, or have the aptitude for. And by the way, there are really good resources to help students figure out what they want to do. And I will say there's one resource, Brian, if you want to send them this is available publicly at Columbia University's website. It talks about finding your skills, interests, values, and personality and connecting it to careers, and that's available publicly. So, there's no use. I myself am trying to put together that kind of information when I work with students through my company, Career Success Academy. But if you want that sooner rather than later, and I'll send you cce.columbia.edu. That's where it is, Brian. It's a very nice website. It has a ton of information. And by the way, there's another website called What Can I Do with This Major? Right? And there are also ways of reverse engineering this, right? Let's say somebody wants to be an investment banker. So what should they study in college, so that they can get to be an investment banker? So it goes both ways, right? I'm studying economics, what can I do? I'm studying political science, what can I do? Or I want to work for a think tank. What are some skill sets should I pick up? What majors will actually give me those skill sets? So, if you think of broadly about liberal arts and the humanities and the social sciences, that, and some of the hard sciences as well, students feel after 4 years in college, they're not quite sure what their skill set is. So really, for someone, if you are working with someone who says, I have no clue, you literally have to walk them through those exercises. And that is when you say, does your college have a career center? And believe me, a lot of the career centers are underutilized, just so you know. People walk in, get their resumes checked and leave, right? But if you encourage them to form a relationship with your career advisor, because once you do that, we will actually walk them through those steps, and we will continue to reach out to them. Even if, let's say I don't see someone for 4 to 6 weeks, they'll get an email from me saying, hey, how are you doing? Especially if they've formed a relationship with us. So one of the things I would encourage all of you to do is to ask them, have you ever visited your career center? And the answer you'll get is, yeah, I've been there. They're not super helpful. In which case you say, please go back. Why don't you get your resume looked at? Why don't you go get your LinkedIn looked at? What does your job site look like? Let's look at it together. If they're sitting in your office room, or have them pull up the job site, jobs board. If a college is in touch with some of the big name platforms that post positions, it gets posted across multiple schools, by the way. So career centers can get jobs that they did not even outreach for. So that's always a possibility, given the way the job boards work these days. So encourage students, one, like I said, to connect with your career center, and then they can come back to you and say, this is some of the self-exploration that I've done. This is what it says. What do you think, right?
Abdul Kamal recommended a book in the chat, What Color is Your Parachute by Richard Nelson Bowles.
Right.
And another one I found helpful, and sometimes I'll recommend to students, is Designing Your Life, which me and Vyju have discussed before.
Oh, it's a fabulous book, by the way. This is my go-to book, Designing Your Life.
There it is.
All my students more or less have to read the book, and we're hoping to come up with a presentation on that as well. And one thing about Designing Your Life is that it is, even though it's run at Stanford, and like Stanford students need help. Anyway, that's what we think about. What they found is when they used those principles with first generation students and so on, the result was that these students felt like they were in control and they saw possibilities. And it's a pretty powerful book, but and the beauty is its simplicity. Very simple, easy to read, very easy exercises to do. So that's another one that I would recommend. But then, the thing is, when a student walks into, your office either as a mentee or as an advisee, in my case, they think that, it's going to be like a magic pill. They're going to swallow it and they're going to figure out everything, right? What they don't realize is all the work that comes with it. So I think setting expectations is key. Telling them that, look, 30 minutes or 1 hour or 2 hours, you're not going to learn everything, right? You got to put in your work. And that's what my students hear from me. So just to give you context, right? A student would spend anywhere from 150 to 180 hours to land an internship of work. That's what it takes these days. I mean, the competition is severe, right? At the MBA level. So students should be also told that landing a job, any job may be easy, but landing a job where you're thoughtful about, what you want to do, and it actually dovetails well between your interests and your skills with what the job wants, to get that nice dovetail is not easy, right? It takes thoughtful planning on their part. And if they're prepared to do that, spend some time talking to people is largely it, by the way. Writing effective emails and talking to people is what gets people jobs, right? And saying your thank yous, of course. So, and that is what Designing Your Life talks about as well. They call it radical collaboration. All it is asking for help and asking for direction.
I just want to make one quick point. I think Lital and Abdul Kamal both hit on it when they talked about what they like about mentorship and seeing that growth with the mentees. And I think even if you don't see the growth personally, like we get a lot of students who'll reach out to us and just say, I was terrified for my first office hour, but now I'm learning a lot. And maybe it's just one-off meetings with each of the professionals, but you can kind of feel a little comfort that their next meeting, they're a lot more prepared and they've learned a lot from you, and they're utilizing that in their further conversations.
That's true. Listen, if anybody wants access to any resource, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to share, what I have or what I've created. Because, I'm so pleased to meet people, like you, who are volunteering their time to help students succeed. And like they say, it takes a village, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of amazing resources out there, and happy to share it. No problems at all. So feel free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vyju. I think this has been awesome, and I really appreciate all the professionals who showed up. I think it means a lot that you take an active stance in trying to help the students as best as you can. Really important is after this, we'll have a post-event survey. If you can, it takes 1 minute to fill that out. It helps us have more events like this. But yeah, I just wanted to really say thank you again, and hope you all have an awesome day.
Thank you all. Happy weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.